But I said to him, sorry, that's just started recording, so it's missed my perfect beginning. I said to my husband, I'll either go back to college and do my PhD, which was what I was originally going to do, or I want to write a book. And he's a great one for plans. So I decided that I would give him my 5-year plan to get published. And that was in romance. And that was in 2000. So I actually got my first romance published in 2005. So it was 4 years, 11 months. So I just about made the deadline of getting published. And he was slightly skeptical about the whole romance publishing industry until I started getting checks, and then he seemed to be quite happy about that after that. So I wrote romance for several years, and then my editor at Kensington, John Sconomilio, I saw him in New York for lunch, and he said, "You've got a history degree, would you like to write historical fiction?" And I said, "No, I would really not want to write historical fiction. It sounds like way too much hard work." He said, "Well, what about historical mysteries or suspense?" So I thought about that. And I said, "Oh, I think that might be an interesting thing to do, because one of my favorite writers is Agatha Christie. I love her books. I just love the cleanness of them, and they're just so well written." So I thought what would be interesting would be to write something along the Miss Marple lines, but set her back a bit further in history, because Regency history is one of my special areas of interest. So I thought, if I'm going to write a whole new genre, I should set it somewhere that I'm familiar with, which is the Regency period, and I know enough about that to have a good background knowledge and know where to start researching. So I started writing the Pearl and St. Mary mysteries, and the first one it was based on the idea of Rear Window, where you have the hero who's stuck in bed. In this case, this hero of Waterloo is stuck in bed, and he's a miserable old aristocratic captain. And the heroine is the vicar's daughter, because vicar's daughters can go anywhere. They can go through all different classes. They're always welcome in people's homes. You can't really turn away the vicar's daughter. So she was basically doing the sleuthing while he was lying in bed telling her what to do, basically. So I liked that idea of her being the more active person for a change. So I started writing that series. And that series was successful. And I wrote 8 books in that series, including Death Comes to Bath, Death Comes to the Schoolroom, Death Comes to the Nursery. All really fun to write. Lots of research, but I only write 1 a year. So that was about enough for me. And then we started this new series, Miss Morton and the English House Party Murders, which is slightly further along. So it's the beginning of the Victorian era. So we're about 1837, 1838. So a little bit later in time. And this time we've got a fallen aristocratic daughter who has to take a job as a companion, and a very wealthy northern industrialist widow who is like her sidekick. Again, the sidekick gets all the best lines and is the full of beans, full of joy person, and poor old Miss Morton is the straight man. So she just has to plod along and solve all the problems. There's a little bit in all my books. There's always a little thread of a romance in the bottom end of them, but they're primarily a mystery, because that's the interesting thing to me. And there you go. There's where we are.
That's great, though. So, in doing do you want to talk about, since we're here, that you're promoting your Miss Morton and the Spirits of the Underworld? It just didn't flow out of my mouth.
That's right.
It's coming out August 22nd, and if you want to kind of go through the setup of, like she said, the first novel always helps set up your characters, and that's why she's excited about her second one coming out, because now you've gotten to kind of know. But for anyone that isn't familiar with this book, if you could tell a little bit about, well, she's not Lady Caroline anymore. A little bit about that, the premise. Go ahead.
Okay, well, she still is Lady Caroline because she can't
Okay.
get rid of that title. You know, that's just how it was back then. She doesn't choose to use that title. She uses Miss Morton because it just sounds it sounds better on the books as well as Miss Morton. She's helping her industrial widow's daughter, Dottie, find a rich titled husband, because she's got all the money and, as they would say in England, none of the class. So she needs somebody to guide her through the season, to know, you know, the social etiquette, how to behave. And she's a bit of she doesn't really want to be told, Dorothy. So there's that sort of theme through this book. And then Mrs. Frodgerton, who's the person who employs her, is just a very enthusiastic woman. And she becomes very enthralled with spiritualism and meets a psychic and is absolutely thrilled about that and insists that Caroline comes to meet this lady as well. But of course, when Caroline is extremely skeptical of the whole thing, but then unfortunately, when she meets the psychic knows things about her that she shouldn't know. So Caroline has to reassess what's going on. And then obviously people die because it's a murder mystery. Can I say who dies? Is that all right with you? I'll mention it. So the psychic obviously dies. You probably all guessed that one because she's holding secrets about everybody. And Caroline, and her Mrs. Frodgerton end up getting involved because a friend of theirs is accused of murdering her. So they end up getting involved, and basically Mrs. Frodgerton's telling the police, Metropolitan Police, how to do their jobs, which is fairly at that time frame when the Metropolitan Police really didn't know what they were doing. So they probably needed somebody to tell them their jobs. And that's really what the book's about, how they work out who killed Madam and who gets killed along the way. And obviously it comes to a nice, thrilling conclusion at the end.
Do you want to, you said you had something to read to us. Do you want to?
Yeah, I'll read you a little bit, which is relevant to the beginning of the book. So we have Miss Morton, and we have a friend of the family called Dr. Harris. We meet Dr. Harris in book 1, where he's very unsuccessfully trying to become a physician to the gentry, but his problem is he has a very big mouth and he's very honest, and it doesn't go very well. So he's moved to London to work at a big teaching hospital, St. Thomas's. So he reconnects with Caroline and Mrs. Frodgerton. And he and Caroline go to visit the psychic, Madame Lavinia. And this is what happens when they go in. So I'm going to read you a bit. Excuse my glasses. Okay. I hope you can understand my accent. All right. Caroline went in after Dr. Harris and almost bumped into his back as he opened the door and paused. Good Lord, what is it? Caroline tried to peer around his large frame. Dr. Harris didn't bother to answer her. Instead, he advanced slowly into the room where Madame was sitting in a chair behind a large desk, her tarot cards spread out in front of her and a half-finished glass of wine at her right elbow. She didn't acknowledge their presence. There was something about her glassy-eyed stare that reminded Caroline of the unpleasant events at Greenwood Hall. She's dead, isn't she? Caroline asked in a whisper. I believe so. Dr. Harris was staring at Madame. Shall I go for help? No. Shut the door, will you? I don't want anyone coming in and finding us here. I beg your pardon, Caroline squeaked. She's dead. As a qualified physician, I am well aware of that, Miss Morton. He finally turned to look at her. I thought we might take a moment to investigate before we raise the alarm. Investigate what exactly? He shrugged. The contents of her desk, perhaps? I can't believe you are suggesting this. This woman is not what she seems, and I think it behooves us to ascertain whether she has any damaging information in her possession before we alert the authorities. Damaging information about you? Caroline asked. I don't recall Madam threatening me with anything in particular. Dr. Harris raised his eyebrows. You sound slightly hysterical, Miss Morton. That's because I can't believe that you're more interested in delving into Madam's personal affairs than making sure that she truly is deceased. He sighed. Fine. He approached Madam and gently held her wrist. I can confirm that she's dead and has been for a while. She might have suffered heart failure or had a stroke. Can we proceed now? I don't want the butler coming in here when he thinks my 15 minutes are up and discovering us with a dead woman. And don't you want to know whether Madam has any further information about your father? Caroline considered this. When Dr. Harris turned his attention to the drawers of Madam's desk, she followed his example. None of the drawers were locked, and they appeared to consist of appointment books and ledgers containing the names and addresses, presumably of her clients. These could prove useful, Caroline admitted. In finding her murderer, Dr. Harris was rapidly sorting through a pile of correspondence. You just said she died of heart failure or a stroke. Why would you think she was murdered? He shrugged as he continued his search and didn't reply to her question. Did you fit these ledgers in your reticule? Of course not. I can't steal her property, Dr. Harris. Do you have no scruples? There's no need to take that self-righteous tone with me, Miss Morton. I'll ask the butler if we can borrow them instead, as if he will lend them to you when he'll think you just murdered his employer. Caroline wrenched open the central drawer and went still. Dr. Harris, what is it now? She reached in, took out the 2 envelopes at the top of the pile and showed them to him. How bizarre, he frowned. They have our names on them. Hello.
That's good. You just had a nice compliment from so a couple things here. So excited to hear from Ms. Lloyd. I have all her Kirkland St. Mary books on my Kindle. So excited to hear about this new series. And then Beatrice wrote, your accent is perfect. Appreciate I cannot pronounce this, genuinely explicit details of your discussion as if we are discussing the writing of the book. Thrilling. I hope you are the narrator of your audiobooks. I am now a fan. That's great.
No, I'm not. Do you know, I actually can't read them. I've tried to read my audiobooks when other people do them, and I can't because it just sounds so wrong to me because it's not me. It just sounds wrong, other people reading my books. So I don't even listen to them.
Well, she's saying we need to have you narrate your own book.
Yeah.
There you go.
I'd love to do it. I think it's very hard though. I think it's a lot harder than it looks to get it right, you know, all those hours and hours of recording. So, but no, I've never done it.
You just had another nice comment. Someone said that they're enjoying it too, and now they're a fan. So
nice, thank you.
Before we started the program, I was telling her that I have a couple people who always I'm like, are you, to plug her program and say, are you going to come to the program? Well, I haven't read any of her books. And I'm like, you don't have to have read her books to come. This isn't school. You're not going to be tested. This is so you can learn about a new author. So this is great. And it's delightful that it's, and I had read Miss Morton, her first one, in the English House Party Murder, when it first came out. And I was just telling her before the program, I reread it last night. And I was like, I really liked it. I sincerely can endorse it because it's my kind of mystery. I mean, I like all kinds. Every now and then I like a good thriller and that, but this is when I want a nice, good old fashioned, this is my kind of cozy, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And we had that discussion too. And she said, if the murder doesn't take place by the 3rd chapter, there's something wrong there. It's not a mystery book. So, and I'm like, yep, my mystery book. And a couple other people have joined the live audience here. And I'm looking at my mystery club people saying, yeah, we agree. If it, where's the murder? So not to sound like that sounds bad, but you know what I'm trying to say. But there's the fun of, as I was reading it, you took me back into that time period, first of all, and it flows. And I sincerely felt it's a page turner, and I want it, and and I like to start solving it in my head, and so that's fun. So with that said, when you write your mysteries, we've learned that there are plotters and pantsers.
Pansters, yeah.
So which one are you?
I'm a pantster.
Wow.
And that is for mystery writers, that's quite unusual because usually they're much more plotters. I have a vague idea what's going to happen. I actually like to discover the clues and the twists and turns as I write it. I actually find it like I'm actually solving the murder, because sometimes I have 2 or 3 people in mind for the murderer, and I don't make up my mind who it's going to be till much later in the book, because I don't know. And then that means, to me, it feels more genuine that I'm following leads about certain people, because I don't know either whether they actually killed the person.
That's
So
I never got that impression. Wow.
My editor, poor editor, I have to provide, obviously, before I write the book, a blurb for the back of the book and a synopsis, which is, I don't know if you know, but a synopsis is the shortened version of the book, how it's supposed to be. So usually I hand that in, and then maybe 6 months later I start writing the book. And then usually about 3 months after that, I email him, go, that synopsis I sent you, well, it's all changed. So we're going to have to change everything. And we've been working together a long time, so he's fairly good about that. And now he knows to send me like the bit, the bit on the back of the book, this bit here.
He
sends me the last copy, because sometimes it's nothing like that anymore. So we have to change it. They'll do this and the cover a year before the book comes out.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
So, I mean, I've got the cover for the next book and the blurb. I haven't written it yet. I'm still, I've only written chapter 1. So it's very far ahead, but because of the printing, they have to get it in the print schedule so far ahead. So, I will try my best to make sure they have the most up-to-date version of what I actually have written, before it goes to print, because that wouldn't be fair, really.
So I know in the first book, because I've only read the first chapter of your new one that's come, and you give a rough, I'm assuming it's Queen Victoria,
just about.
Yeah. So that's kind of neat. You mentioned Melbourne, what's it, Mount, I am blanking out. The person that Queen Victoria, she's taking his advice. The way you worded it, it just flowed. It was very tongue-in-cheek, and I just was impressed with that. So that you interjected that in there, so you get a little, because like you said, you're actually writing a historical fiction mystery, which is a whole new mouthful of a term, new genre for to say. And so that was good how you got that in there, I thought.
I've got a history degree, so I think the primary thing that a history degree teaches you is how to research and how to ask questions, and ask the right questions and find the information. And that's vital when you're writing a novel, because you can get that information fast if you need it. How to ask and how to find it, because usually these days you can't visit all the locations you write about, especially during COVID. You were stuck in for 3 or 4 years, you couldn't go anywhere, so you had to basically rely on the internet or friends to go and walk around places for me, or so that information and finding that information is important to me. Being also from the UK and a history buff, I really don't like it when I read books that are not accurate, that don't make the effort. And I mean, like basic things like maybe titles, or ground floors, first floors, things, or weird things turning up in Victorian England that are basically very American, that wouldn't be there or wouldn't be used, the words wouldn't be used. So I try very hard to be as authentic as possible, in that English voice. Of course, I have the opposite problem when I write cowboy books. Kate Pierce. So I have to be very careful to run that by several Americans before they're published, because still after 23 years, there are still the occasional word that I will totally get wrong and put a British word in. Yeah, and luckily I have readers to go, can't say that. They won't make sense to. I always put torch instead of flashlight. Just one of those words.
Good
get wrong. But so I try as hard as I can to make my American books as accurate to America, and my British books, especially the historical, as accurate to the time period as possible. And there's a way to do it without sort of giving people a lecture or dumping huge amounts of research. I mean, I'll research something for days and there'll be 2 lines in the book about it, you know, because that's the important part to that story. But I had to know all the rest of it in order to find out what was the piece I needed.
You did a nice way of weaving in Lady Froggington, for example. She has money, but the way she became into money is kind of looked down upon by because it was textiles and whatever. It wasn't.
That's right.
It's not old money that's been passed down generation for generation, you know, that kind of thing. They work for their money. And I thought that was that's just something that we just don't think about. And I'm sure you have the same thing in your country. Like you pointed out, Mrs. the widow Froggington is from the North. And just like we have, being here on the East Coast, I'm originally from Ohio. So we every now and then, some of my coworkers, we have a discussion about, like, when I lived in Maine before I moved down here, and I went in the grocery store and I was looking for a grocery cart, and they call them carriages. And just a different, just like the first time I went to London, that was the first time I heard of apartment was called a flat, so you probably have that same thing going on, not just the time period, but the region that you're writing in. So.
Can I tell you my best coming to America story? When I was just after I moved to California, I was on the phone because my internet had gone down, which is obviously a tragedy. My husband was away, so I had to call support. Back in those days, it was actually a person that you talked to. So I called support, and this guy picks up, and he sounds like Elvis. And I'm thrilled. I'm like, this is the best thing ever. He sounds like, ma'am. And I was just like, this is brilliant. So we start going through the problem, and he says, first name, last name, first line of your address, what state are you in? And I'm like, well, I am a bit stressed, but hopefully you're going to fix my problem. And there was this really long silence, and he said, ma'am, I meant, what state do you live in? Because I thought he was asking after my mental health. What state was I? And I thought, Americans are so kind and so lovely. But no, he actually wanted to know. But there was this very long silence. He probably just did not know what to say. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. It's California, but it was very funny because it just was, I didn't even think, about that. I was just thinking what a nice man he was, and he sounded like Elvis. So yeah, it's very easy to make mistakes. I'm better now. I'm after 23 years, I'm better now. I notice tourists when I'm here now. I notice American tourists, and I'm like, excuse me, I can interpret for you. I speak both languages. This is what you want, and this is where you want to be, or this is what you should be asking for. So they look at me like I'm mad because I sound English, right? But I have got a bit of American.
Because the first time I went over there, I thought this is going to be great. Everybody speaks English, and well, especially like Ireland. And then I had people speaking Gaelic to me, and I was like, wait a minute, we're all supposed to be able to understand each other. So it's
quite different. Great. I think there are a lot of differences. I had to really think about, and also the humor and everything is quite different. I had to sort of pick my words far more carefully when I lived here. In the US, I had to think about things a lot more.
Yeah.
So that was a surprise to me as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. Someone gave you a nice look. Another compliment. Miss Lloyd truly does show the class system for both periods of time. And the Caroline books and the newer series. So that's great. Two countries separated by a common language. Yeah, that's a good way.
Right,
That's a good point, Larry. So anybody else have anything that they want to ask or
I'm drinking my tea.
sure, you may pour some tea. You do have the third one that she was saying too, that it was so long ago that she wrote the one that's coming out. Now she's in the middle of the third one. So yeah, and when you write more than one series too, how do you keep track of all that? Do you have note cards or do you just work up? Yeah, she's like, I don't know. I'm just throwing out things I've heard from other authors. Okay.
I have piles of paper basically. I have lots of notebooks and they're all stacked up. My husband's like a very, very tidy, precise person. And he comes into my office and looks at my stacks of paper and his hand reaches and I'm like, do not touch anything, because my entire plot is laid out on my desk on pieces of paper. And I know exactly that it needs to be exactly like that. It's the only place in the house he's not allowed to touch at all, because it's there for a reason. You know, I don't plot. I'm actually quite an economical writer. I write a very, very good first draft. About 85% of it is down straight away. I leave, because what I do is if I don't know something or I need to research something, I leave like a little note to myself and then I just move on. So then I go back and fill in the gaps when I'm able to. These books, as I said, I finished the Caroline St. Mary is finished. So that's done. There's no more Caroline St. Mary books. There will be, as I said, another Miss Morton, which is going to be Miss Morton and the Deadly Inheritance. So, as you might imagine, the person who's in peril is probably going to be Caroline, I think, which is always fun. After that, I don't know, because what tends to happen, you probably know from other authors, is you get a contract for a certain number of books, and then they look at that and see how they do and decide whether they want to offer you another contract, or you decide whether you want to write any more, or you want to write something different. So I mainly I write one of these a year, and then I write probably 2 or 3 romances. So that's really more my bread and butter. Money, this is more I love writing these because they're just more challenging and interesting, and
Yeah, someone asked, do you feel like under pressure to get the next one out? It's the question before the one that's up right now. Are you feeling pressure to get the third book out?
The last few years, I mean, we were living in Hawaii for 8 years, and then we moved to California for a year, and then we moved over here last year. So the last 2 or 3 years, plus the pandemic, have been very quite stressful and a lot of change. I did, for the first time last year, I did say to my editor, I need more time. Can we push these back a bit? And we pushed everything back as far as we could, just to give me a bit of wiggle room. Mm-hmm. Normally I write a book in, I'd say 3 months takes me to write a book. And it's very, I have 4 kids, so I always used to drop them off to school, and then I'd write, and then I'd pick them up at 3 o'clock. So that gave me sort of a 6-hour day with 5 hours with lunch. So I would, and I still stick to that pretty much. I still do that schedule, which suits me fine. But I know that if I'm not, and I write 5 days, I don't write weekends. If I write X number of words a day, for me in those 5 days, I know that I will have a book written. Even if I write a minimum of 1,000 words a day, I'll have a book in 85 days. That seems to me fairly simple and straightforward to me. That's how I work it out. If I write more than 1,000 words a day, which is some days I'll write 5,000 words, I'm ahead of myself. But I always gauge it. I look at the deadline, because they will say to me, we want a book, in June, every June 21, 22, 23, we want one of these. So that gives me a year. And then I'm doing other things, so I'm juggling those. But I will say, okay, I'm going to write a Catherine Lloyd book, which I'm doing right now. So it's due in December. So I know even if I don't want to do a lot, I can write 1,000 words a day and that book will be done. I just break it down into small bites, and that works for me. That schedule of sitting down, writing, reviewing, and as I said, I do it mostly on the page, so I'll have a very, very complete first draft. By the time I get up to my 85 days or 75, whatever 1,000 words it is, I'll have a very complete draft. So I'll only need a week or something to go back over it. And then I send it out to people to read for me, who point out all the places where I've messed up. Because mysteries are so vital that people don't work out who it is on page 3. You know, that's like always your nightmare as a mystery writer, that everybody's going to say, I know who did it, you know, and that's always, because the trouble when you write mysteries is usually you know who did it, so you're writing backwards. You're actually writing the story backwards, which is interesting if you think about it, because you know, but you can't let anybody else know. You have to only let them know at the end. So it's a different skill set to writing a romance or something like that, where you're working towards a happy ending. This time you're actually working backwards. So which is a different challenge.
I think you've answered about your daily rituals. So at what point do you know a series has come to an end? Well,
for me, I think it tends to be that there's two things. One is when your publisher goes, you haven't made us enough money, so we're not going to, we don't want any more, thanks very much, goodbye. And that does happen, right? The other one for me is I always try and write a different book and a better book. So like with the Curl and St. Mary's, I actually originally had a 9-book contract to write 9. I got to 8 and I thought, I don't know what I want to say in this particular series with these particular characters. I don't know whether I have anything I want to say that I haven't already said. And I don't want to repeat myself, particularly with mysteries, because there's a very, especially cozies, there's a very distinct way of writing them, right? So, and in a small village like Curl and St. Mary, you can't kill everybody. It's like you've killed half the population. So like 2 murders a book, so you're like 20 people, 18 people down, maybe. That's a lot of people. It's not like Midsummer where there's like hundreds of people.
That's exactly what I was thinking of.
But for me, I also feel, because for me there's also that personal character arc. In the Curl and St. Mary's, there's an arc where they don't get on, and then they gradually realize they care about each other, and then they get married. Don't want to give you spoilers, but they do get married. And then there's an evolution to where they're in a happy place. And when they're in a happy place, you don't want them to have to deal with death and murder. That to me, you don't want them having to deal with death and murder anymore. Like, let them be happy. Let them not have to trip over a dead body for a few years. So that to me was a natural place to stop it. And that's the same with any series you write. You have to, for me, it has to be, I have to be passionate about what I'm writing. I have to really want to write it, because it's a lot of work, So to me, there's either a publisher ending where they're like, bye, you're done, or there's a you ending where you're like, I think I've written enough. And what often will happen is you can go to your editor or your agent and say, look, this is what I want to write now. So under the same name, for example, I might write other things under Catherine Lloyd, more historical fiction maybe, or something else. I don't know yet. But, I have to be inspired. I just can't dial it in. Just can't do that. I really want to be better and to write the best books I can. And if I get bored, then I'm not going to do that.
Fair. Anybody in the audience?
I have a question.
Sure.
I hear the expression writer's block. Have you ever had that? Or if you do have it, what do you do?
Could you hear her? She asked about writer's block. Have you ever had it? And if you have had it, what do you do?
Writer's block,
Mm-hmm.
Did you say?
She asked about, have you ever had writer's block? And if you have, what have you done about it? What do you do about it?
I would say up until last year, no. I've been published since 2005. consistently published. So to me, it's always been, I think you have to have that ability to write, you have to have that talent, but you have to have some sort of drive to be a professional writer. You have to be able to sit down and do that writing, even if things aren't great. To me, I've never really had writer's block, because it's so fundamental to who I am writing, that if nobody was paying me or reading me, I'd probably still be writing. So I never had it until last year, when I got COVID when I was on a flight to San Diego, and I haven't really been very well since. So I'm struggling with that a bit. For the first time in my writing career, I'm actually struggling with that focus, and my energy levels. So that I would say, I'm not sure if that's quite writer's block, but it's definitely slowed me down.
Yeah, knocked you off your feet. Yeah. Well, hope you're doing better. So somebody else had a question. It's kind of a whoops. Is it true that even if someone borrows your book from a library, you still get some money through a sort of contract with the library? I don't know anything about this. And or is the income only from hardback, paperback, and electronic purchases? Well, the library buys the books for the library, so you would definitely get credit for that. To answer the first part, as the librarian here, we don't do anything about, I mean, we keep track of circulation and how, I don't know, I don't know anything about getting an author getting credit because their book's being circulated so many times. That'd be great, but it's not like a TV show or a record, a recording that's being played. Go ahead.
In the US, you sign a contract for a particular type of book. So in this instance, the Miss Mortons, they'll tell you they're going to come out in hardback, first of all. And then these will come out as a trade paperback a year later, because these are very much aimed at the libraries, these hardbacks. So in the US market, they will come out as hardback. They will also simultaneously come out as an ebook on the same day. So you have those two options. And then what will often happen is that they will then release a trade paperback, which is the soft version. Sorry, I saw that, the soft version later. And then what might happen is they will sign a separate contract with you for a large print book. That will happen, could happen.
That's good to
and
know.
then they will sign, sometimes you'll get an audio deal. So you will then get a new contract for audio. So those things all add up. And then there are different territories. So for example, the Miss Morton books are coming out in England. So you can now, they're in the English territories. So that again is a separate contract. There are also all the Curl and St. Mary's and Miss Morton's are available in German. So a German publisher bought the foreign rights for them, so you can get them all in German. They have beautiful covers on them. I really love the covers, the German ones. So again, all those things, you get a little bit of money, extra money. You sign an original contract where you get an advance and you get a percentage of the price of each book, which is very low. Just like to say, poor sad author, very low. And then you get money from those additional deals. Usually it's more like a one-off unless it does well. So you'll get like a minimum advance from a foreign edition. But if it does well, you get royalties from that as well. Now in the UK, they have a system whereby if people borrow your books from any library and you've registered them with the British Library, you get paid for every library read. It's pennies, but if you've got 20,000 people reading your book, that's 20,000 cents, right? That's money that every person who reads that library book, you get paid a tiny amount of money, which they don't have in the US, which is a nice little bonus. If you're a British writer, you can get that money which I only found out about it recently because I've just moved back here, and I thought, oh, that's lovely to get that extra little bit of money from the library patrons.
Oh, that's good. See, that's good to know, because I never knew. And it's too bad. You should be. It's, you know, I would hope that circulation in libraries would help. At least it helps with your people wanting to read more of your books.
But you know, I lived in the library when I was a kid. We didn't have a lot of money in our family, but we all loved to read. So I spent the whole summer living in my library, reading every single book. So for me, my books in the library is just like a life dream to have that. That's just amazing.
That's nice to hear. It's nice. Anybody else? Anything? Anything else you would like to share with us? Like anything?
Me?
Yes. About Miss Morton, like
I tell you, one of the most fun books I wrote was the one Death Comes to Bath, because I went to visit Bath, and I don't know if any of you have been there, but it's a Roman spa. It was a Roman spa town. It's where Jane Austen lived. It's like, if you're a history buff, it's like, you know, one of those places that. So I had a lovely time in Bath, staying there for 2 weeks and literally walking all the routes in the book, because there was a murder at the baths, and I wanted to work out whether one particular character could get from A to B in a certain amount of time if he went a different route. So I sent my husband off one way, timed him to see if he would get to where I wanted him to get in a specific time. So that was fun to do. And there's always those wonderful moments when you're writing that something suddenly clicks, or you find out a little bit of information that suddenly makes sense of the book, you know, and I love that. These ones, the Miss Morton, the spiritualism thing, I thought was fascinating. To be fair, it came over from America, actually, that big wave of spiritualism in the middle of the 18th, 19th century. And I did push it back a bit to get it into my time period. It wasn't really as rampant and as fashionable, but I was really interested in it. And again, I read so much about it and looked up all these people. Most of them are complete scammers, you know. They're just like, nothing's changed. Nothing's changed, really. There's always people trying to scam you out of your money. But that was fascinating to go and read all about those people and their influences. An American woman who came over here was like a big star, you know. Almost none of that gets in the book. And as I've already told you, the psychic gets murdered. She's not in the book for 3 chapters, but her influence and how she affects other people, and the willingness of people to believe people, you know, it's such a human thing, isn't it? And still now, it's the same now. We all believe, you know, we like our snake oil. Is it snake oil, doctors? You say in the US?
You're saying right. I was just going to say, that time period, they were really popular because we know about the guy that wrote Arthur Doyle, that wrote Conan Doyle, that wrote the Sherlock Holmes. Wasn't he into that, having seances and all? There are a lot. That's
right.
Because
that's right. He was.
There was just that time period, I think.
Yeah, they always ask me for cover ideas when they're, you know, doing the cover for the book, and I sent them all these amazing pictures from these brochures and pamphlets of all these spiritualists with all these amazing images, and they're like, nah, we're not doing that. So, okay, we'll have a slightly spooky, slightly spooky cover, but it's not terribly. There's no spiritualism or tongues of flame coming out of people's heads or hands or anything. So I'm slightly sad about that, but it's a nice cover.
I had to explain to a couple people, this is a mystery, that inquired about it. And I said, no, it's, you know, we're not having a spiritualist talk about the underworld. That's just the title of the book.
Yeah, I mean, usually to be fair, my editor usually picks the titles. Here, I don't often. I think actually this time I picked the second one and the third one, and he picked the first one. So there's a certain set to them, a certain style. Miss Morton and is the series indicator, really. But he loves to pick. I can give him 50 titles and he'll go, nah, I'm going to do something completely different. So I've learned that not to worry about that he usually picks decent titles. Although, of course, all my English family are like, why does it say English house party? Because for them, they wouldn't have put that word in. It would just say, and the house party murder. Because it was written for the American market, it has English in there, you know.
Yeah, the Downton Abbey, you know, whatever. So do you, when you're, I just thought of this, when you're writing, do you have a place around where you live that you, in your mind, that is where Miss Froggatt's the place she's renting, or is it just all in your head? I mean, do you have a building or?
Well, I grew up I'm actually a Londoner.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in the Far East, the East End of London, not actually a Cockney, but I'm in that general vicinity. So I sort of grew up going into London and back and forth in London. And my mother was a librarian and then she was a teacher. So she absolutely was fantastic at taking us to interesting places, museums and all over London. And, you know, because there's so much in London to see. So I was very familiar with London, very familiar with the area, you know, the areas that I wanted to put in the book. So, and again, I will go and look at them. I will go and look at the streets and look where they are in relation to other streets. You can go online and look at a map of the inside of a townhouse in where they're renting a house. You know, you can do that. In Bath, you can go into a similar house and see it laid out how it would have been in the 19th century when Jane Austen was there. So there's so many resources now that you can do to imagine yourself. And I think just having grown up in England, you have a very much sense of the past around you. Because you know, you grow up and it's like, oh, well, in this picture you can see of me, this is where I live, which is Bradford-on-Avon. And that bridge behind me is 13th century.
Wow.
The middle arches in that bridge were built in the 1300s. You know, that's old. Yeah. And then they put an improvement in the 15th century, and then they did a double lane in the 17th century. And it's got a lockup on it, which was where they used to put the town drunks with 2 cells, like a little chapel. You can't see it from this angle, but there's a little lockup literally over the water where they dump you if you got drunk and leave you overnight to dry out. So, you know, the history's all around you here. You know, I don't think you grow up with it. And if you're lucky enough to have a mother like mine who drew your attention to it and would say, look, this is a Roman wall, this is this, what do you think about this? Those things all inform who you are and your sense of place, which I think is when you're writing mysteries or you're writing historical mysteries, to have that sense of place around you is really important.
Someone asked, do you publish your romance books under a different name?
Yeah, Kate Pierce. Yeah, you'll find me. You can't miss me. There's like 85 of them.
And of course, someone's a big fan of, you know, Hyacinth Bucket. Would you ever include someone like her in one of your books? Well, you're right.
She's a bit like my mother, actually. My mother always used to say, you know, when we were eating our tea, she'd be like, if you don't hold your knife properly, you'll never have tea with the Queen. That was like her answer to everything. If you're not polite or you don't do X, you'll never have tea with the Queen. She was quite pop. My mum thought she was quite posh. She was a bit of a Hyacinth Bouquet. So I grew up, I know that person intimately.
Bouquet. I couldn't think of it. Oh my gosh. Anyway, forgive me for mispronouncing that. I should. Very famous character.
British people are very class conscious. They might say they're not, but they're very, very class conscious. The moment you open your mouth, they've immediately put you into a box of what they think you are and where you're from. They don't know what to do with me now because I've come back with my American attitude of let's do it now. So I'm a little bit direct. I think sometimes they get a bit scared of me sometimes because I'm very direct. And like, we're okay, this is it, we're going to do this now, right? And they're like, okay, because they're not used to that, especially coming from a British sounding person.
This has been fun. No, you make it, like someone said earlier, it makes it authentic, because I've learned there are people, they write under a pen name and they make it sound Irish, and they write Irish, the mysteries take place in Ireland or, you know, other countries, and then you find out that's they've never been there. Or, you know, and there's somebody that the same thing. I thought they probably grew up in England. And I'm not naming names. It just, we've all read those books, and then you find out, wait, what? They live in New York City. Wait, what? You know, I'm just giving, yeah. And so it's really nice to know that I knew when I found out from Larissa from Kensington, and I thank Kensington Publishing for connecting us, that we were going to be Zooming. You had moved back to England. I was like, wow, this is okay. She really lives there. She writes about what she knows. This is great. So, and not that you can't move and live somewhere else. So you know what I'm trying to say, but
yeah, I mean, my greatest compliment with my American romances, where people don't realize I'm British.
There you
that
go.
To me is like the best thing, that people assume I'm American, and then they're like, you're British. Like, what do you know? Like, probably nothing, but as I said, I have good readers who tell me when I'm wrong, so they'll say, no, you can't have that, that's the wrong word, still after all these years. But I think English historical, that kind of writing is probably my most natural voice. That's the voice that is flows most naturally for me, and I feel most comfortable in.
Well, the time just flew by, which is great. And I can't believe we are running out of time now. But everybody's shaking their heads. And I'm sure everybody at home has said this has been a delightful, it's our afternoon, not an evening for you. This has been a wonderful time getting to know you. And we look forward to more of your Miss Morton books. And thank you so much for taking the time today. Nice. Thank you. So, and thanks everybody that Zoom.
It's been a pleasure, and I'm going to go off and have another cup of tea now.
Okay. Well, the book comes out next week, everybody. So
yeah, August 22nd. Thank you. Hope you enjoy it.
Thank you so much.
You. Thanks very much.
Bye, everybody, and thanks everybody that joined in on the Zoom today. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.